I imagine I'm about to meet some scientific superstars, people I've heard about, read about, even spoken about. I think I will be surprised. I shouldn't be surprised, but I have a funny feeling that I will be, because these guys are always at the cutting edge. They're always ahead, and people like me, we're following them. We're learning today about what they did ages ago. I don't think I'm trepidatious about anything. People keep telling me I should be, but I'm not. I am strong of stomach, I am weak of mind, and I think I'm ready for everything. I'm really excited. I'm really genuinely so excited to be here. I never thought in a million years I would get to be inside this place and talking to these people.
Well, I'm David Ranson. I'm a forensic pathologist.
Yes.
And I'm the Deputy Director of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine.
Okay.
So I suppose when you think about it, why do you have death investigation in this way? Well, everyone's going to die.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I brought you here to I wanted to feel what it felt like to be you. I wanted to immerse myself in death, because I thought this is what it feels like to be David.
Well, you're absolutely right. But of course, death has meaning. Death has meaning not just for families and individuals, but it has meaning for the community. And, you know, a cemetery like this is the community celebrating and acknowledging death.
Yeah.
And acknowledging the lives of the people who are buried here. So what we're about is saying, what value is there in a death for the community? How do the dead speak to the living? And we are, in a way, the translators that allow the dead to speak to the living and give them a voice in terms of what will their death and their life mean for generations to come.
That's amazing. That's a great way of looking at it.
Because you see, we are all contributing to various aspects of life in the community. Yeah. And some people contribute in a very basic way, bringing up a family, doing a job, building the infrastructure of our community. Other people may win the Nobel Prize and leading lights in a whole variety of fields. It doesn't matter. Everybody leaves their mark. But in fact, how people die and how they came to die, that information itself also gives the community tremendous information that can help the living.
And it's not just the local community that you guys are involved in. Can you do me a favour and place the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine internationally, globally for us, please? Because it's an incredible position you have.
The Institute's one of the largest forensic medical institutes in Australia. It probably is the largest single medical institute, combining the toxicology, combining all the DNA work, combining the pathology and the clinical all together. Yeah. Now, as a group, we are able to bring a large body of experts together to assist people not just around Australia, but also overseas. So whether there's a major disaster, whether there's a plane crash, whether there's a major fire, or whether there's a warfare situation where people in the community die, we're able to help in certain ways. And the particular way that the forensic community helps is in the area of identification of those who've gone missing during the disaster.
So I know that you have staff members who assisted in the tsunami identification of victims, in Kosovo, in identification of victims of mass graves. You yourself travelled to the Netherlands to help identify victims of the MH17.
Absolutely. And we use all of those skills and experience from those events to help us when we have something like the Black Saturday bushfires, because we had a lot of our staff who had that experience. Yeah. So they were immediately able to apply that experience to dealing with the situation in Victoria and the tragedy that confronted us. I mean, the work that Professor Stephen Cordner has done with the International Committee of the Red Cross and working in Africa and in Asia and the Pacific Islands, where we go over and say, look, There are not enough forensic pathologists in the world to deliver these services. So we need to train the local communities to do the basic steps to ensure that we later on can come along and have a look and check and make identification of people who are deceased. Because if you get the early steps right, then you can solve so many of these instances far more quickly and return people to the loved ones. And that's what we're about, returning a deceased person to the loved one, giving the family some certainty that they have been found, understanding what really happened to them. And in a situation when we're dealing with warfare situations, often there's a lot of false truths that get put about what happened. And one of the roles of the forensic pathologist there is to establish the truth of what happened.
Wow.
And in the long term, that helps communities come to terms with perhaps what might be terrible war atrocities. Because at least if you know the truth, you've got a place to start, and the healing can start with the truth.
Well, recently, and I've been involved in investigating some children that have died in swimming pools. And that's a huge tragedy for our society, that children are still dying in swimming pools, because we have a lot of them, backyard swimming pools in particular. So I was investigating the death of a young child in a rental property where the pool fencing hadn't been maintained, and this child got up in the night, wasn't being supervised, or during the day somehow accessed the pool, because children have a natural attraction to water. And with the fencing not being rigorously maintained, the child accessed the pool and unfortunately died. So I used the prevention. I'd already had a couple of matters where children had died in pools, and one in a spa, homemade spa in a rental property. And so I was really upset about this happening again. And when we looked at I asked the Coroner's Prevention Unit to look at what was happening with legislation and other recommendations that had been made. This is not good enough. Here's another tragedy. Another child has died because nobody's inspecting these properties, particularly in rental properties. Nobody's taking responsibility for the maintenance of them, not the owner, not the tenant, not the real estate agent. And so with that information that I got from the CPU, from the Coroner's Prevention Unit, I made it I was really strong in the words I used. And I'm really happy to say that they've now enacted legislation that's coming into place where people have to register their pools.
Yes, right.
There's going to be mandatory inspections. So that's all coming into place next year in this state. At the moment, I've got a number of matters that I'm investigating and taking to inquest in relation to people in aged care facilities, where I've been really concerned about the staffing ratios, the training, the lack of first aid training for the personal care attendants who predominantly make up the carers in these facilities now. So there are issues surrounding aged care I'm concerned about at the moment. Also in the Act, it particularly articulates about our prevention role and about that we have to look out for families, and that we have to take into consideration about different cultural and religious beliefs in making decisions, if we can.
Yes.
So all those things about just putting it into legislation just means that we've got a better guideline about how to consistently act. And that brings with it some certainty, and it brings some strength. And I think it brings with it a higher level of investigation and findings and recommendations. There's really been a lot of significant things actually, and which should make us proud, I guess. And that is, for example, way back the introduction of seatbelts in cars. So I think Victoria was the first in the world to do that and to make it compulsory. We are pretty well, I think, I'm not sure if we're first in the world for bike helmets, but that was also recommendations from coroners. Significantly too, and in more recent times, is the suicide barriers on the Westgate Bridge. There was a number of recommendations coming from coroners over the years.
Well, the overriding purpose and objective of the court is to make Victoria a safer and healthier place by reducing the number of premature or preventable deaths. And whilst coroners investigate individual deaths that are reportable, they have the power to not only determine what the cause of death is, the identity of the person and the circumstances, but most importantly, they're able to take a broader view of the death and determine whether there are public interest aspects to the death which really mean that it could have been preventable, and they are able to make recommendations or comments which will have the effect of reducing the number of preventable deaths, but also look at larger issues such as public health and safety and the administration of justice. Well, coroners investigate reportable deaths, but the reason that coroners investigate reportable deaths is with a view to making findings about the identity of the person who's died, the cause of death and the circumstances. And if there are circumstances that reveal that the death was preventable, then a coroner is able to make recommendations and comments in order to reduce the number of preventable deaths, thereby making Victorians healthier and safer. And those recommendations can have regard to issues of public health and safety and the administration of justice. So there's really a very broad remit. And the Coroner's Prevention Unit is comprised of medical experts in different fields, including mental health, obstetrics, emergency medicine, and the coroner is able to seek the assistance of the Coroner's Prevention Unit as to whether there were any preventable aspects to the death that the coroner is investigating. The Coroner's Prevention Unit has also established the Victorian Suicide Register in order to plot the data from that cohort of deaths, to be able to recognise trends, to be able to identify either hotspots or potential trends that coroners should be aware of. But also importantly, it's with that data that the Coroner's Prevention Unit is able to advise coroners about any potential recommendations that could arise from their investigations. So the Coroner's Prevention Unit is, I think, jealously regarded by most other jurisdictions as really a jewel in the crown of the Coroner's Court, because it has such an important impact in terms of our ability to make those recommendations for the safety and health of the Victorian community.
Wonderful.
A great strength of the Act is that when a coroner makes a recommendation in a finding, that must be published on the internet, and there's a requirement that if those recommendations have been made, then the entity to whom they've been made have 3 months in order to respond. And so it's very powerful for those to receive those responses. They must be reported, published on the internet, and even if they're not taken up, well then if there's a similar death, it's something the coroner can point to further down the track. And in something like the refitting of the Westgate Bridge, in terms of the barriers that were put up, that took something like 10 years of coronial recommendations to be made to achieve that purpose.
So why don't you tell us now what your name is and what your job is?
Okay, my name is Noel Woodford and I'm the Director of the Victorian Institute of Forensic Medicine.
That means the big boss.
Yes, I've got two roles really. I'm the Director of the Institute, which is a statutory entity, and I'm also I hold the Chair of Forensic Medicine at Monash University.
How long have you been there though?
I've been there now for 15 years, although I did, as part of my other life, which was surgical registrar training, I spent 2 weeks there and did a lot of autopsies in a short period of time and fell in love with the place, I think.
Show off.
Fell in love with its work.
Yeah.
And I thought when I finished my training that I'd somehow like to come back there one day.
Oh, how wonderful. And so you got back there?
I got back there in 2003, having spent 3.5 years in the UK. And just basically went and became a forensic pathologist, staff pathologist, and became head of pathology back in 2008. Took over from Stephen Cordner, our director of 27 years, back in 2014.
Okay.
So unusually for an institution like ours, we have a foot very much in the academic camp, but also in the service work camp as well.
Yes, yes, I was surprised to find that out. So not only are you actively carrying out the investigations, the autopsies, the forensic work, but you're educating people as well in Australia and internationally.
Yeah, we're educating lots of people, really. There's, I guess the word is stakeholders, but the stakeholders, the people with an interest in the work that we do, would be the police and lawyers who are representing both the state and families or an accused, clinicians, and most importantly, families. So we're trying to explain the results of our tests to those people in terms that they can understand.
Yeah, especially to dummies like me who might find ourselves on a jury where scientific information is really important, and I'm no scientist, but your people find a way to explain it to me.
Yes, and what they want is reliable information. So that's where the academic arm is very important, because what we say has to have an evidence base. It has to have a research base so that people can know that they can trust our opinion.
Yeah, but I know that you are another of the people in the building who is so good at your job that you've been promoted beyond being able to really do it much. Do you get to do many autopsies anymore?
No, not as many as I'd like, but that's one of the prices to pay for the job. And
Same.
I
don't get to do many anymore either.
Don't you?
No, it's a real bum. Yeah.
Okay. No, I do like it when I get to do it. I mean, I guess to the extent that I do it these days, it's more supervising some of the younger trainees. But when the stars align, I can go on call, which isn't that frequently. I do get my hands involved in suspicious casework, which is great, but also the day-to-day casework, which is important for the coroner and for families.
I love that you want to be involved with the trainees, especially. That's
Well, that's the next generation of pathologists, and so we have to look after them.
Yes. Is it nerve-wracking, do you think, having you there? I'm sure you want
pretty
to.
nice, I think.
I'm sure you want to play a mentoring role. You're a very nice person, but do you think they find it a bit nerve-wracking?
No, not at all. I mean, I think forensic medicine or forensic pathology is actually one of the smallest medical specialisms.
Okay.
So to that extent, there's a fair degree of collegiality. We've got 14 pathologists at our place, all of whom get along. And when trainees are accepted into the program, they get looked after. And I think they find it an enjoyable experience.
I feel like your place is a very special place. And that's the vibe I've been given by your pathologists, that it's a very special place to work. And your pathologists have a frame of reference that includes the whole world. Like they've been around, they've worked in other places.
Yes, they have.
Your institute seems to have a special atmosphere. Why is that?
Look, I think it's the work, partly defined by the work we do.
Why did you want to come back to it? Why, when you worked there briefly, what made it so special that you wanted to come back to it?
Well, I like the nature of the work for a start, but I like the way it was practiced. I like the philosophy of the place, which is one of, we're in this for prevention. We're in this to prevent similar deaths. In a previous life, I was training to be a surgeon, and I liked seeing patients, but leaving that world behind really replaced the patients with another sort of vicarious patient, if you like, which is the families. Yeah. And I like the thing that attracts me, and I'm sure it does with the other pathologists, is the problem-solving element, but also providing solace to people, and also supporting things like the justice system, supporting community health. That's why we're in it.
What's your vision for the future?
Well, the vision for the future, I think, as far as death investigation goes, is having it done smarter. So that doesn't necessarily mean doing a full autopsy on every case that comes through the door. People are often surprised that of the cases that come through, and we have about 6,500 a year in Victoria, we only do autopsies on about 48% of those cases. And that's because we're getting cleverer with the way we test for drugs. We've got a CT scanner, just like you'd see in a hospital. So every case that comes through the door gets a CT scan.
Which seems so obvious to me, and yet you are one of the very few facilities in the world that does that.
Well, we're lucky. We got support from government for this. Not every place has the wherewithal or the connections to get the money to provide this. Death investigation's not highest on government's agenda most of the time. That goes into sort of health or live people, but we see it as a really important contribution to health, and to that extent it aligns very much with hospital health. So we do a CT scan, we can look at the results of those scans to provide answers, and those answers might be the positive answers. So in other words, we can see a cause of death, or we can see a contribution to the cause of death, or negative. So if the question from the police or families is, did grandfather fall over and has he got a hemorrhage in his head? We can do the scan, and if that's the only question in the case, we can answer it no. And then we've got a better idea about what else happened to this person, because we've examined the person externally, we've looked at the notes from the doctors, we've done a toxicology test and other tests, and we can provide answers to families sooner rather than later and have the deceased back in their care.
Well, you must be very proud to be running the place that you're running.
I love the place, I have to say. It's great.
Pretty great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I come back, please?
Yes, of course you can.
I really like it there.
Yeah.
I tell everyone about everyone. I just can't believe these people. I feel like every day when I left here, I would be phoning people and texting people and like almost door-knocking neighbours to say, oh my God, let me tell you about David. Let me tell you about Richard. Let me tell you about Mel. You know, it was like every day when I left, I wanted to tell everyone about the people I'd met that day, what I'd learnt about them, what they'd done with their lives, because they're all so quiet about it. And they're all tucked away in this little building in the centre of Melbourne with apartments around them. And I just can't believe they're not famous. Honestly, what they're doing with their lives and what they've dedicated their lives to is so incredible. That's what I tell people, is that they're quietly going about their business, and their business is amazing.